Hello bread friends, it's Bert with the Bread Brothers, and today I'm going to show you how to make your own sourdough starter. Don't be intimidated, it's much easier than you think and it takes less time than you think. All you need are 3 ingredients: flour, water, and a little bit of thyme. So let's get started. I've already measured out 60 grams of whole wheat flour, and I'm using whole wheat flour because those whole grains will kickstart the fermentation process much better than, say, an all-purpose flour. But right now you may not have access to different flour, so I'm going to also make one with all-purpose flour, same amount, 60 grams, which is about a half a cup, so we can compare the difference in these 2 jars. I also have the same amount by weight of water, 60 grams, which is about a fourth of a cup, that I'm going to add to this jar and stir it up. So let's just add this to my bottle, add my water to the bottle, and just give this a really good stir. And it's going to look a little pasty. It's going to look a little, I'll let you see what that looks like. And that's what it should look like. And we're just going to cover this up with a little bit of plastic wrap. Not tightly, just loosely. You can also put a piece of fabric on here, like a little towel. And we're just going to let that bad boy do its thing for about 24 hours and we'll come back and check on it. It's day 3 of our sourdough starter making process. Day 2, we just let it sit. Little bubbles started to form, but nothing was happening. Now you can see that these have little bubbles in there. That means it's eating and letting out gas, kind of like I do. And then here's the all-purpose flour. It's doing some of the same, so that's perfect. So now on day 3, we need to feed it exactly what we started it with. 60 grams of all-purpose flour this time and 60 grams of water. And we'll put that in here and then we'll give it a good stir. I'm probably going to spill here because I used a cute glass bowl instead of something that would actually go in here. Perfect. Made a mess a little bit, but that's okay. Add my water. And I'll show you what this looks like once it's all stirred. And you want to stir that all the way in. Get all of that flour incorporated into that start. And it should be, you see how it looks right now? It feels a little sticky, so I'm going to add an extra tablespoon of water to this. I've got a little extra water here. I'm just going to add a little bit more water to that. That looks better. And see how that looks? Now I'm just going to let it sit again. We'll come back to this tomorrow and feed it again. All right, I've done it to the all-purpose flour one that we started. Same thing, same amount of water and flour, and that's what this one looks like now. Almost like a thin batter or a mixed up yogurt. And that's what we want this to look like. And now we'll just cover it again. Both of these, cover them, put them in a warm place, and let them sit until tomorrow. Okay, we are on day 4, and you could see how bubbly they were, especially the whole wheat one. They're starting to get a little bit of a stronger smell as it's fermenting. But before we feed these today, the important thing is to remove about half of what's in this bottle before we feed it. Otherwise, we keep feeding and feeding and feeding, and it would get so full. So I'm going to take half of this out. You can see it's a little slimy. It's really kind of runny now that I've scooped into it. I'm going to take about half of that out and discard it. It won't work to make bread. And then I'll add my 60 grams or a half a cup of all-purpose flour. I put it in a better container today so we're not spilling all over the counter. And then 60 grams of water, which is about 1/4 of a cup. And then I'll stir that really well with a fork until it's completely incorporated. And then I'll cover it again loosely like this with a little bit of my plastic wrap, maybe a little towel, and put it back in its same spot and let it keep growing. All right, day 5 is the same story as yesterday. We're gonna stir these up, remove half of them, add our 60 grams of flour, all-purpose flour, 60 grams of water. Stir them up and let them rest. Good news is that the one we started with all-purpose flour is actually starting to catch up to the one that we created with whole wheat flour. It's starting to bubble up, starting to smell a little bit like that one. So there we are, day 5. All right, day 6. Here's what it looks like on the inside. Still bubbly, and more of the same. We need to stir these up real well, remove half of it and discard it, and then feed it with flour and water and stir it up again. So that's it for this. I'm gonna cover it back up, put it over in its warm place, and let it sit another night. And that's it on this. Now the all-purpose flour one that we started with just all-purpose instead of the whole wheat finally started really growing, producing a lot of bubbles from the fermentation the last day. Now the whole wheat one grew a little bit in the night and was going back down, so it was really ready to be fed. The cool thing about that is I didn't do it at the exact same time today. It's very forgiving. I can add it when I get to it. But that's it for today. It's not quite ready. I think we still need a couple more days before we're able to bake with this. Our wheat has really been eating this time. Our one that was just all-purpose is a little bit less. The smell now is not as strong. It's starting to smell just like bread, and so we're getting really close. I'm gonna feed it one more day, and I'm gonna try baking with it this weekend. So here we go. Our starters, both of them, the one we started with whole wheat flour and the one we started with all-purpose flour, after I fed them today, have grown significantly. The whole wheat one has grown a lot more, but they're both very active and bubbly. They smell really good. They smell like baked bread. There's not a sour, stringent smell to them. They smell really nice. So I think they're ready to begin baking bread with. So what I'm going to do the ultimate test, I guess the ultimate test would be to bake a loaf of bread with it. But a test that will help you know is to scoop a little bit of this into water and see if it floats. So I'm going to do that with both of these and see what they do. So this is the one I started with whole wheat flour. Let's drop that in the water and see what happens. Look at that. It's floating around on the top of the water. So I'm going to bake a loaf of bread with this. I'll get the process started tonight and bake it tomorrow, and we'll see what that looks like, how the bread turns out. Let's do it with the all-purpose flour. Let's see if it's ready too. Let's get a scoop of this and drop it into the water, and look at that. See how nicely it floats in there across the top? These sourdough starters that we started from scratch are ready to bake with. Okay, I have in front of me 2 loaves of bread that I started yesterday on day 8 of creating our sourdough starters. This is the one I created with whole wheat flour the first day, and this is the one I created with all-purpose flour on the first day. Fed him exactly the same every other day with all-purpose flour and water. So the one that I started with wheat was a little more active. The bread did rise a little bit more than the one with only all-purpose flour, but it still looks great. It's going to be totally edible. In 8 days, we created our own sourdough starters from scratch. It's easy for you to do it too and start creating your own bread from scratch. The last thing to do with these, I did feed them this morning. You can see how full they both are. They're very bubbly and active, is to transfer this into a clean jar. Now I have my start named Jimmy, and I've had him for almost 2 years in this jar with a little lockdown. No metal in the lid, it's glass and the little rubber stopper. When I feed my start, I never seal it all the way. It can build up a lot of pressure. And so it's nice to be able to just open that up a little bit and let it feed and get air. And so when if you're not going to be using this very regularly, you store it in the fridge. You don't need to feed it maybe a week, every 10 days. Just watch for it to start to go down, keep a rubber band on it, and it may start to develop a little bit of a liquid on the top. They call that hooch. It's actually almost like an alcohol from the fermentation of the flour in here. You can stir it in and it will make your bread a little stronger, the sour flavor. Some people like to pour it off. It's totally your choice. I don't like to stir it in. I pour it off. It's a little strong. We at our house like the bread a little bit more mild. So I guess the last thing to do is to cut into these and see what they look like on the inside. I'm curious myself. So let's cut into this first one. And here it's got a nice crispy crust on it. So that's perfect. That's what we want to see. And let's look inside and see. Look at that. It doesn't have tons of bubbles in it, but it's still beautiful. It's spongy. It bounces back. In 8 days, we made a perfect sourdough starter. Let's cut into the other one and see how it looks. Nice crust again on that. That's good. The crumb sounds good. Very similar. It just didn't rise quite as high. That's a nice sponge or crumb. It's springing back. So you can do this on your own. 8 days, a few minutes every day, a little bit of stirring, and a lot of waiting. And that's it. Have fun with this. Let us know how it goes. Share, subscribe, tell your friends, and bake bread and be happy. Hey, are you still here? So I tasted these. Very interesting. The crumb is very similar, but the flavor is a little bit different. And I made these exactly the same last night. So the one I did with only all-purpose flour, never fed it any whole wheat flour to start with, has a little bit sour, more sour of a sourdough flavor. And the one I started with whole wheat flour has a milder flavor. And so I know I've been asked a few times from people, hey, how do I make my sourdough start more sour? Well, I've found in this experiment that starting with only all-purpose flour has made this a little bit more sour. So give it a try and let us know how it goes.